Somewhere in the desert of what is now Pakistan, there's a mound of silence. It rises from a flat, sun-baked plain. Cracked earth stretches in every direction. The heat is absolute. The wind moves through ruined doorways and empty streets, carrying nothing but dust. No one lives here now. But 4,000 years ago, this was one of the greatest cities on Earth. Its streets were laid out in a perfect grid, oriented to the compass points, wider than most medieval European roads. Its homes had multiple rooms, private wells, and drainage systems that carried waste away through underground channels. Its granaries stored enough food for tens of thousands of people. Its craftsmen produced jewelry so fine that merchants carried it across 1,000 miles of ocean to sell in distant cities. At its peak, some believe this city held as many as 80,000 souls. 80,000 people living in a city so well planned, so carefully built, so quietly organized, that archaeologists who first uncovered it in the 1920s refused to believe what they were seeing, because nothing in the historical record had prepared them for this. This was not a lost chapter of Egyptian history. It was not a forgotten corner of the Roman world. This was something else entirely. A civilization that emerged independently, in its own place, on its own terms, and grew to become one of the largest civilizations of the ancient world. Larger than ancient Egypt, larger than Mesopotamia, larger than both of them combined, at least in the territory it covered. The Indus Valley Civilization, at its height around 4,500 years ago, stretched across a territory of over 1 million square kilometers. It contained more than 1,000 settlements. Its people spoke a language we have never been able to identify. They left behind a script, carved into stone, pressed into clay, etched into tiny seals no bigger than a postage stamp, that no one has successfully deciphered. Not a single word. They left no pyramids, no clearly identifiable kings or emperors, no warrior rulers commemorated in stone, no temples to gods whose names we know, no records of battles won or enemies defeated. Just cities. Perfect, quiet, organized cities, with drainage systems so well engineered that many were still structurally intact when archaeologists uncovered them after 3,000 years of silence. And then, somewhere around 4,000 years ago, they stopped. The cities emptied. The script disappeared. The standardized bricks stopped being made. The drainage systems fell into disrepair. And one of the greatest civilizations the ancient world had ever seen, quietly, without drama, without a single account of what happened, faded back into the earth. This is their story. Or rather, this is as much of their story as we have been able to piece together. Because the Indus Valley people, in their 4,000 years of silence, have kept most of their secrets remarkably well. Settle in. This journey takes a while. The year is 1826. A British Army deserter named Charles Masson is wandering through the Punjab, the vast, flat plains of what is now Pakistan, looking for nothing in particular. He has abandoned his regiment. He's traveling under a false name. He has no scientific training, no funding, no institutional backing. He's just a man walking through a hot, dusty landscape, trying to disappear. And then he sees it, a large mound rising from the plain. The ruins of ancient brick walls, half buried in the earth. Locals tell him there was once a great city here, a city so old that no one remembers who built it or when. They call the place Harappa. They have been pulling bricks from its ruins for generations, using them to build their own homes, their own roads, their own walls. Masson writes it down in his journal. He notes the strange, large bricks, the scale of the mound, the feeling that something significant is buried here, and then he moves on. His notes are filed, largely forgotten. The world moves on too. Decades pass. The British expand the railroad network across India. Engineers need ballast, heavy material to pack beneath the railway tracks and keep them stable. Someone realizes that the ancient bricks at Harappa are exactly the right size and weight. Perfectly made, remarkably durable even after thousands of years in the ground. And so, the ruins of one of the greatest cities in human history are scooped up by the trainload and laid beneath the tracks of the Lahore-Multan railway line. No one yet knows what is being destroyed. It is not until the 1870s that a British archaeologist named Alexander Cunningham visits Harappa and begins to suspect that something unusual is buried there. He recovers a small stone seal, a tiny carved object, barely larger than a postage stamp, with strange markings on it. The markings are unlike any known script. He publishes a brief note about it. The world, again, moves on. Then, finally, in the 1920s, two men change everything. John Marshall is the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. He has spent years overseeing excavations across the subcontinent. In 1921, he assigns one of his inspectors, a meticulous Indian archaeologist named Daya Ram Sahni, to begin a systematic excavation at Harappa. Simultaneously, another inspector, Rakhal Das Banerjee, is excavating 200 miles to the south at a site the locals call Mohenjo-Daro, a place whose name, in the local Sindhi language, means something quietly unsettling: Mound of the Dead. What they find at both sites over the following months and years does not make sense. Not because it is primitive, not because it is chaotic or crude, but because it is the opposite. The cities they uncover are planned, organized, rational. The streets are straight and wide. The buildings are made of standardized bricks, the same size, the same proportions, whether found in Harappa in the north or Mohenjo-Daro in the south, 200 miles away. The drainage systems are intact. Underground channels covered with fitted stone slabs running beneath every major street. Wastewater from homes flowing into large brick-lined drains. A public sanitation system far more sophisticated than most contemporary urban infrastructure anywhere in the Bronze Age world. Marshall writes to his colleagues in London. He tells them they have found a civilization, not a village, not a tribal settlement, a civilization. One that no historical source had ever mentioned. One that the ancient Greeks did not know about. One that the later Indian texts, the Vedas, the epics, do not clearly describe. One that had simply vanished from human memory so completely that its very existence had been forgotten for more than 3,000 years. In 1924, Marshall publishes his findings in the Illustrated London News. The reaction is immediate and electric. Marshall himself declares that the finds are without parallel in the archaeology of the ancient Orient. He draws comparisons to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, but notes that what he has found appears to be something separate, something independent, something that emerged entirely on its own terms. The academic world, which had believed it had a reasonably complete picture of the ancient Bronze Age, suddenly finds that picture is missing an enormous piece. A piece larger than anything already in it. Excavations accelerate through the late 1920s and into the 1930s. More of Mohenjo-Daro is uncovered, more of Harappa. New sites begin to be identified across the region. The picture grows larger with every season. And then history intervenes. In 1947, British India is partitioned into two independent nations, India and Pakistan. The border drawn between them cuts through the heart of Indus Valley territory. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa both fall within the new nation of Pakistan. The Archaeological Survey of India, which had led the excavations for decades, suddenly finds itself on the wrong side of a border, separated from the greatest sites it had ever worked on by a boundary drawn in the space of a few weeks between two nations that would spend the following decades in repeated conflict. Collections were divided, researchers were separated from their sites. Access became politically complicated, then sometimes impossible. For years, Indian and Pakistani archaeologists worked in effective isolation from each other, studying two halves of the same civilization from opposite sides of a hostile frontier. The partition did not stop the archaeology, but it shaped it in ways that are still felt today. It meant that the story of the Indus Valley Civilization was told, for decades, primarily through the lens of two sites, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, when the reality of the civilization was vastly larger and more diverse than those two cities alone could represent. It took the excavations of the following decades to begin to reveal that full scale. On the Indian side of the border, archaeologists began identifying and excavating Indus sites across the states of Gujarat, Rajasthan, Haryana, and Punjab. One site in particular, in the Rann of Kutch in Gujarat, would prove to be among the most significant finds in the entire history of Indus archaeology. Dholavira. Not fully excavated until the 1990s, Dholavira is one of the largest Indus cities ever found, and, in some respects, the best preserved. Unlike Mohenjo-Daro, which had been heavily excavated and in places damaged by early archaeologists working before modern techniques were established, Dholavira had lain largely undisturbed. Its massive stone walls, its sophisticated water management systems, a network of reservoirs and channels designed to capture and store every drop of rainfall in a region that received very little of it. And its monumental gateways revealed dimensions of the civilization that had not been visible before. The discovery is still unfolding. New sites are identified every few years. New excavations are underway right now in India and Pakistan, slowly, carefully, peeling back more layers of earth. Ground-penetrating radar is revealing buried structures without a single brick being lifted. Satellite imagery is identifying the outlines of settlements in landscapes that appear, from the ground, to be empty desert. Each new find adds a little more detail to a picture that remains, even after 100 years of archaeology, stubbornly incomplete. We found them, but we have not yet, not really, begun to understand them. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a city. Not a modern city, not a medieval city with its tangle of narrow alleys and market smells and the sound of animals in the street. something different, something quieter, and in some ways more orderly than almost anything built in the ancient world. The streets are wide, wider than you might expect, wide enough for two carts to pass each other without slowing. They run in straight lines, north to south, east to west, laid out along the compass points with a precision that feels deliberate, almost formal. The bricks beneath your feet are uniform, every single one. The same length, the same width, the same thickness. Not approximately the same, exactly the same. A standardized unit of measurement applied with remarkable consistency, not just in this city but in every Indus city across a territory the size of Western Europe. This is what stopped the archaeologists in their tracks. Not the age of it, not the size of it, the order of it. The Indus cities, and we will focus here on Mohenjo-Daro, the best excavated, the best understood, were not built the way most ancient cities were built. Most ancient cities grew organically. A settlement forms near water. Houses cluster together. Paths become streets by accident, worn into the earth by 10,000 pairs of feet. Markets appear. Walls are added later, when the city is already large enough to need defending. The Indus cities do not look like that. They look planned. Mohenjo-Daro is divided into two distinct zones. To the west, a raised platform, archaeologists call it the citadel, rising about 12 meters above the surrounding plain. It was built on a massive platform of mud brick, probably to protect it from seasonal flooding. On top of it sit a collection of large, carefully constructed buildings. To the east, the lower city, the residential and commercial districts, spread across a grid of streets with blocks of houses, workshops, and public spaces laid out in an organized pattern. Together they housed somewhere between tens of thousands and perhaps 80,000 people at the city's peak, though the exact figure remains debated. Let's walk through what they built, because it is extraordinary. The homes of Mohenjo-Daro are built of fired brick, not sun-dried mud brick like most of the ancient world, but properly kiln-fired brick, harder and more durable. The houses face inward. Their doors and windows open onto interior courtyards rather than onto the main street, a design that provides shade, privacy, and quiet. The exterior walls are largely blank. A stranger walking down the street sees only brick, but inside, these are real homes. Multiple rooms, staircases, suggesting upper floors, now lost to time. Private wells. More than 700 individual household wells have been found at Mohenjo-Daro alone. Private bathing areas, and in almost every home, a connection to the drainage system. The drainage system. This is the detail that archaeologists return to again and again. The detail that quietly astonishes everyone who studies it. Every major street in Mohenjo-Daro has a brick-lined drain running beneath it, covered with fitted stone or brick slabs, sloped to carry wastewater away from the city, connected to the drains from individual homes through a network of smaller channels. Inspection holes were built into the system at regular intervals, so workers could access and clean the drains without digging them up. Think about what this means. These people, 4,500 years ago, were not just building houses. They were building infrastructure. They were thinking about what happens after the water leaves the home, where it goes, how it is managed, how the system is maintained. This level of civic planning was remarkably advanced for the Bronze Age, centuries ahead of most contemporary urban infrastructure anywhere in the ancient world. Now walk up the hill to the citadel. The most famous structure here is one that has puzzled archaeologists since the moment it was uncovered. It sits near the center of the raised platform. It is a large, rectangular pool, 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, nearly 3 meters deep. Built with extraordinary care. The bricks are set in a precise pattern, sealed with a natural tar called bitumen to make them watertight. Steps descend into the water from both ends. Changing rooms or storage spaces line the sides. A drainage channel allows the water to be emptied and refreshed. Archaeologists call it the Great Bath. What it was used for, no one knows for certain. It is too large and too carefully constructed to be a simple water tank. The quality of the waterproofing suggests it was meant to hold water for a specific purpose, and the location on the citadel, among what appear to be large public or administrative buildings, suggests that purpose was significant. The leading interpretation is ritual bathing, purification, a space where water was used not just for cleanliness but for ceremony, perhaps for priests or civic leaders before important rites. But we do not know. And this is something you will hear again and again about the Indus Valley Civilization. We can see what they built. We cannot always understand why. Elsewhere on the citadel, there is a large building with a series of parallel walls and air spaces that many archaeologists believe was a granary, a centralized food storage facility large enough to supply the entire city. If this interpretation is correct, it suggests a level of economic organization that is remarkable for the period. A civic authority with the power to collect, store, and presumably redistribute agricultural surplus across a population of tens of thousands. There are also what appear to be large assembly halls, spaces designed for gatherings, public spaces, built to hold people together. No palace has ever been found at Mohenjo-Daro. No building that clearly served as a royal residence. No space that announces itself as the home of a king. No throne room, no grand ceremonial gate designed to impress visiting dignitaries with the power of a ruler. This is one of the most quietly remarkable facts about the entire civilization. Where are the rulers? We will return to that question. It runs through everything about the Indus Valley people and has no clean answer. For now, keep walking. Beyond Mohenjo-Daro, the civilization reveals its full diversity. Harappa, 200 miles to the north, is in some ways the mirror image of Mohenjo-Daro, another large planned city with a raised citadel, a lower residential district, and the same standardized bricks and drainage systems. But Harappa shows something that Mohenjo-Daro only hints at: the organization of industrial production on a civic scale. Entire districts of Harappa appear to have been dedicated to specific crafts. Bead makers worked side by side in concentrated areas, producing the carnelian and steatite and faience beads that were among the most prized trade goods of the ancient world. Potters occupied their own quarters. Bronze workers, shell craftsmen, dyers. Each trade appears to have had its own space within the city's fabric. The shellwork alone tells a remarkable story. The conch shells used by Harappan craftsmen came from the coast, hundreds of miles away. Someone was organizing the collection, transport, and processing of raw materials across vast distances, supplying urban workshops with the ingredients they needed to produce goods that were then traded even further afield. This is not the informal economy of a village market. This is something that looks, in its basic structure, recognizable as supply chain management. Then there is Dholavira, the great city in the desert of Gujarat, excavated seriously only in the 1990s, that has rewritten much of what we thought we knew about Indus urban planning. Dholavira sits in a landscape that receives very little rain, and yet it sustained a large urban population for centuries. The reason is water management of a sophistication that is, even by modern standards, impressive. The city was designed around a system of reservoirs, large, carefully engineered, stone-lined tanks that captured every drop of seasonal rainfall and stored it for use through the long, dry months. Channels directed runoff from the surrounding landscape into these reservoirs. Sluice gates controlled the flow between them. The entire city was, in effect, a machine for harvesting and conserving water in an environment that provided very little of it, naturally. 16 reservoirs have been identified at Dholavira so far. Together, they could store hundreds of thousands of liters of water, enough to sustain the city's population through the driest years. Dholavira also revealed something found nowhere else in the Indus world: a large inscription made of white gypsum pieces inlaid into wood, displayed above what appears to have been a major gateway into the city. 10 signs, large enough to be read from a distance. A sign in every sense of the word. We still cannot read it, but its existence suggests that writing, or at least the public display of written symbols, was not confined to small seals pressed into clay in private transactions. It was, at least in some cities, displayed publicly, meant to be seen, meant to communicate something to everyone who passed beneath it. What it says remains, like everything else in the Indus script, a mystery. At Lothal, on the coast of what is now the Indian state of Gujarat, archaeologists found something that stopped them completely. A large, rectangular basin, carefully engineered, connected to an ancient river channel, interpreted by many archaeologists as a dockyard, though some researchers argue it may have served as a reservoir. If the dockyard interpretation is correct, it was large enough to accommodate trading vessels and equipped with a sluice gate that could regulate the water level inside as the river outside rose and fell. 4,500 years ago, the engineering required, the understanding of water flow, structural load, and tidal or seasonal river patterns is not what most people expect from a civilization that the wider world has largely never heard of. And then there are the weights. Among the tens of thousands of artifacts recovered from Indus sites, archaeologists found large numbers of small stone cubes, carefully shaped, remarkably consistent in their proportions. They are weights, standardized weights, following a precise mathematical system used across the entire civilization. The same weight found in Mohenjo-Daro in the south, the same weight found in Harappa in the north, the same weight found in the coastal trading port of Lothal, hundreds of miles away. A unified system of measurement, maintained across a territory the size of Western Europe, without, as far as we can tell, a centralized empire to enforce it. This is the question that the cities keep posing in every direction you look. How? How was any of this coordinated? How were the brick sizes standardized? How were the weights unified? How were the drainage systems built to the same design in city after city across 1,000 miles of territory? Without obvious evidence for kingship or militarized rule of the kind seen in Egypt or Mesopotamia, without the temples of known gods, without the written records that every other ancient civilization used to hold itself together. The Indus Valley cities were, in some sense, the most organized and the most mysterious civilization of the ancient world at the same time. They built things far more sophisticated than most people expect from the Bronze Age. And they did it quietly and together in a way that no one has fully been able to explain. Begin with a simple question. Who were they? It sounds like it should have an answer. 4,500 years of human history have passed since the Indus Valley Civilization was at its peak, but we have recovered their cities, their tools, their jewelry, their pottery, their seals, their weights, their drains. We have found their skeletons. We have extracted DNA from their bones. We have studied their teeth, their diets, the angles of their joints, the wear patterns on their hands. And yet, the question of who they were, where they came from, what they believed, how they organized themselves, what language they spoke, what they called themselves, remains one of the most genuinely open questions in the entire field of ancient history. Let's start with what we can see. The people of the Indus Valley were not a small or isolated group. At the civilization's height, possibly several million people lived within its territory. Estimates vary widely because we are still discovering new sites, and because the boundaries of the civilization were not fixed lines, but gradual transitions into neighboring cultures. What is clear is that they were spread across an enormous area, living in settlements that ranged from small farming villages of a few hundred people to major urban centers of tens of thousands. And across all of that distance, across all of that diversity of landscape and climate and local circumstance, they shared things. They shared the bricks, the standardized weights, the drainage systems, the pottery styles, a distinctive red ware with black painted decoration found in consistent forms across the entire civilization. The seals, those small carved stone objects pressed into clay to mark ownership or identity, bearing the undeciphered script and images of animals, found in the same style from one end of the civilization to the other. This shared material culture is one of the most striking things about the Indus people. It implies contact, trade, a common set of standards maintained across vast distances. A sense, however it was organized, of belonging to the same world. What did they look like? We have some clues. A small number of figurines and carved stone sculptures have been recovered from Indus sites, and while they are few, they are vivid. The most famous is a small bronze figurine found at Mohenjo-Daro, just over 10 centimeters tall. A young woman standing with one hand on her hip, the other arm draped with bangles from wrist to shoulder. Her hair is pulled back. Her posture is confident, almost defiant. She looks directly forward. Archaeologists call her the dancing girl, though whether she was dancing or a dancer at all, no one actually knows. She is simply the most alive thing to survive from the entire civilization. Looking at her across 4,500 years, you feel the specific presence of an individual human being. There is also a carved stone bust, sometimes called the Priest King of Mohenjo-Daro. A bearded man with a patterned robe, his eyes half closed in what looks like meditation or ritual concentration. He wears a headband. His expression is composed, interior, remote. Whether he was a priest, a civic leader, a merchant, or simply a man whose face a sculptor found interesting? We have no way of knowing. The title was given to him by the archaeologists who found him, because they assumed someone so carefully depicted must have been important. The assumption may be right, or it may tell us more about the archaeologists than about the man. Beyond the figurines, we have the skeletons. Human remains have been found at several Indus sites, not in great numbers, because the Indus people do not appear to have built large, formal cemeteries in the way that Egyptian or Mesopotamian cultures did. But enough have been recovered to tell us some things. Compared to Egypt or Mesopotamia, clear evidence for warfare and weaponry is surprisingly limited in the sites excavated so far. No mass graves consistent with massacre. The picture that emerges is of a civilization in which warfare appears far less visible archaeologically than in many contemporary societies, though absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence, and our understanding continues to develop as new sites are uncovered. The skeletal evidence also tells us about diet. The Indus people ate well by the standards of the ancient world. Their diet included wheat, barley, rice, lentils, sesame, and a range of fruits and vegetables. They kept cattle, water buffalo, sheep, and goats. They ate fish. The Indus River and its tributaries were rich with them. There is evidence of trade in food products across long distances, suggesting that even ordinary people had access to goods produced far from where they lived. And then there is the DNA. In recent years, ancient DNA studies have begun to shed new light on who the Indus people were and where they came from. The results have been both illuminating and, in certain political contexts, contested, because the question of Indus Valley origins sits at the intersection of genetics, archaeology, and modern South Asian identity in ways that make it genuinely complicated. Here is what the current evidence suggests. The Indus Valley people appear to have been descended from a population that had lived in South Asia for a very long time. Ancient hunter-gatherers of the subcontinent, with deep roots in the region going back tens of thousands of years, mixed with early farmers who had arrived from what is now Iran, sometime before the civilization emerged. They were not, the DNA suggests, closely related to the later waves of people who migrated into South Asia from the Central Asian steppes. The migrations associated with the spread of Indo-European languages, which arrived in the region after the Indus civilization had already collapsed. This matters for a question that has generated enormous debate. Were the Indus Valley people the ancestors of the later Vedic culture, the culture whose texts, the Rig Veda and the Upanishads, form the foundation of what becomes Hinduism? Most scholars believe elements of Indus populations contributed genetically and culturally to later South Asian populations, though the relationship between Indus society and later Vedic traditions remains debated. Modern South Asians carry ancestry from multiple sources: ancient South Asian hunter-gatherers, early Iranian farmers, and later steppe migrants, in varying combinations depending on region and community. The Indus people contributed to that mix. How much, and in what ways, is still being studied. What the DNA cannot tell us, what nothing can tell us yet, is what language the Indus people spoke. This is the deepest mystery of all, and we will spend an entire section on it shortly. But it is worth naming here, in the context of who these people were, because language is identity. Language is how a people names the world, passes down knowledge, tells stories, argues, prays, loves. The Indus people had a language. They used it to write. Their script appears on thousands of seals and tablets and pottery fragments. They presumably used it to conduct the trade that stretched from the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia, to Oman, to the Persian Gulf Coast. And we cannot hear a single word of it. What we can say, looking at everything together, the cities, the skeletons, the figurines, the DNA, the trade goods, the careful drainage and the standardized weights, is something that feels both simple and profound. These were people. Organized, inventive, pragmatic people who built cities that worked, who fed large populations and managed their waste and traded across vast distances. Who made beautiful things, the dancing girl, the carved seals, the delicate gold and carnelian jewelry found in their homes. Who lived, apparently, in a civilization that lasted for 700 years at its peak before something began to go wrong. 700 years. Let that sit for a moment. The United States of America, as of this recording, is 250 years old. The Roman Empire, from the time of the first emperors to the fall of the western half, lasted roughly 500 years. The Indus Valley Civilization, at its mature peak, endured for 700 years. And if you count the entire arc from its earliest roots to its final decline, closer to 2000. And we do not know their name for themselves. We do not know what they called their cities, their rivers, their gods, if they had gods in the way we understand the word. We do not know what they celebrated, what they feared, what stories they told their children at the end of the day. We know they were here. We know they built something extraordinary. And we know that somewhere inside all the silence they left behind, there are answers we have not yet found. There is a prize, a substantial prize, offered by a private foundation to anyone who can do what no linguist, no cryptographer, no computer scientist, no artificial intelligence system has yet been able to do. Read the Indus script. Not translate a difficult ancient language. Not decode a partially understood writing system with a few missing pieces. Start from zero, from silence, from a collection of symbols carved into stone and pressed into clay by people who have been dead for nearly 4,000 years, and figure out what any of it means. So far, no one has claimed the prize. The Indus script is one of the last major undeciphered writing systems in the world. It has been studied seriously for over 100 years. It has been subjected to statistical analysis, computational modeling, pattern recognition, and comparison with dozens of known ancient languages. Hundreds of papers have been written about it. Entire academic careers have been devoted to it, and it remains completely and stubbornly unread. Let's talk about what we actually have. Roughly 5,000 inscribed objects have been recovered from Indus sites. Most of them are seals, small, flat, rectangular tablets, typically made from a soft stone called steatite, hardened by firing. They range in size from about 1 centimeter square to about 5 centimeters square. Carved into the face of each seal is usually an animal: a bull, a rhinoceros, an elephant, a tiger, a creature that appears to be a unicorn, though it is almost certainly a side-on depiction of a bull or aurochs, and above the animal, a short sequence of signs. The signs are the script. There are also inscriptions on pottery, on small copper tablets, on bone, on ivory, on terracotta. The same signs appear in varying combinations across all of these surfaces. In total, researchers have identified somewhere between 400 and 600 distinct signs in the Indus script. The number varies depending on how you define a distinct sign versus a variation of an existing one. This is an important detail because the number of signs in a writing system tells you something about how it works. Alphabets, like the one you're hearing right now, have a small number of signs. English has 26 letters. Most alphabets have between 20 and 40 characters because each sign represents a single sound. Logographic systems, where each sign represents a word or concept, have thousands of signs. Chinese has tens of thousands of characters. Egyptian hieroglyphics, in their full form, use several hundred to several thousand signs. The Indus script, with 400 to 600 signs, sits in an uncomfortable middle ground. Too many signs for a pure alphabet, too few for a pure logographic system. This suggests it may be what linguists call a logosyllabic system, where some signs represent whole words or concepts, and others represent syllables, similar in structure, though not in content, to ancient Sumerian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphics. But this is inference, not certainty. Here is the core problem. To decipher an unknown script, you almost always need what scholars call a bilingual, a text written in both the unknown script and a known language, covering the same content. The Rosetta Stone is the most famous example, the same decree written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, Demotic Egyptian, and ancient Greek. Because scholars already knew ancient Greek, they could work backwards into the hieroglyphics. The linear B script of the ancient Aegean, another long undeciphered writing system, was finally cracked in 1952 by a young British architect named Michael Ventris, partly through brilliant pattern analysis and partly through a hunch that the underlying language might be an early form of Greek. For the Indus script, there is no bilingual, not one, not a partial one, not a single inscription that appears in both the Indus script and any known ancient language. There is one tantalizing possibility. In the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, archaeologists have found references to a trading partner they called Meluha, a distant land reached by sea that supplied them with carnelian beads, copper, ivory, and a type of wood. Some scholars believe Meluha was the Indus Valley Civilization. If this is correct, then there may have been Indus merchants living in Mesopotamian cities, and Mesopotamian texts may contain borrowed Indus words. But even if Meluha is the Indus Valley, and not everyone agrees it is, the Mesopotamian texts give us single words at most, not enough to crack a writing system. The inscriptions themselves present another problem. They are short, remarkably short. The average Indus inscription is just 4 or 5 signs long. Most inscriptions are extremely short, often just 4 or 5 signs, and even the longest are only a few dozen signs long. This is not enough text to do the kind of statistical frequency analysis that helped decode other ancient scripts. You need repetition, variation, long stretches of text to find patterns. The Indus inscriptions give you almost none of that. What were they used for? The most widely accepted theory is that the seals were used as markers of ownership or identity, pressed into clay to seal packages of goods, to mark consignments for trade, to identify the sender or the recipient of a shipment. In this interpretation, the inscriptions are not literature. They are not religious texts or royal proclamations. They are closer to address labels or signatures or the ancient equivalent of a stamp. If this is correct, it would explain why the inscriptions are so short. A seal used to mark a package does not need to say much. It needs to say, "This belongs to or comes from this person or this place or this institution." A name, a title, a location. 4 or 5 signs is enough for that. But this interpretation also has a troubling implication. If the Indus script was primarily used for commercial marking, for trade and administration, then the texts that might have told us who these people were, what they believed, how they governed themselves, the longer texts, the religious texts, the historical records, may have been written on materials that did not survive: cloth, wood, leaves, palm fronds, bark. All of it rotted away in the heat and humidity of the South Asian climate, leaving nothing behind. This is not an unlikely scenario. Many ancient cultures kept their most important records on perishable materials. If the Indus people wrote their myths, their laws, their histories on organic surfaces that 4,000 years of South Asian summers would have destroyed completely, then we are not looking at a civilization that left no written records. We are looking at a civilization whose written records we have lost. That distinction matters. It is the difference between a people who did not write and a people whose writing we cannot find. There have been many attempts at decipherment over the years, some serious, some less so. A Finnish scholar named Asko Parpola has spent more than 50 years working on the script, building a massive comparative database of signs and their contexts. He believes the underlying language is an early form of Dravidian, the language family that includes Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam, spoken today by hundreds of millions of people in southern India. His work is careful, rigorous, and widely respected. And still, even he acknowledges that a full decipherment has not been achieved. Others have argued for Sanskrit, for an early form of Munda, one of the indigenous language families of South Asia, for a language completely unrelated to any surviving tongue. Each theory has its advocates. None has achieved anything close to consensus. In 2009, a team of researchers at the Santa Fe Institute published a statistical analysis of the Indus script, comparing the mathematical structure of the sign sequences with known writing systems and with non-linguistic systems like DNA sequences and computer code. Their conclusion was that the structure of the Indus script most closely resembles that of a linguistic system, that it is, in all statistical probability, actual writing encoding actual language, not simply a set of symbols or pictograms. This was reassuring in a way. It confirmed that there is something to decode, a real language, locked inside those short sequences of signs. We just cannot hear it. And so the seals sit in museum cases in Karachi and New Delhi and London and Washington. The small carved animals stare out from behind glass. The signs above them, the fish, the jar, the comb, the man with arms raised, wait. They have been waiting for 100 years. Somewhere in those 400 to 600 signs is the name of a city, the title of a leader, the record of a trade, a prayer perhaps to a god whose face we have never seen, a word for river or for rain, or for the particular quality of light over the Indus Plain at the end of a long, hot summer day. We are standing right in front of it, and we cannot read a single word. Every ancient civilization, when you study it closely enough, turns out to be stranger than the textbooks suggest. But the Indus Valley Civilization is strange in a specific way. It is strange not because of what it has. It is strange because of what it doesn't. Every other major civilization of the ancient Bronze Age world, Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, the early Aegean cultures, shares a recognizable set of features. A ruling class, visibly elevated above the rest. Monumental architecture designed to express the power of kings or gods. Armies, and the weapons and fortifications that armies require. Temples to named deities, decorated with images of worship and sacrifice. Royal tombs filled with treasure and the bodies of servants sent to accompany their masters into the afterlife. These are the fingerprints of early civilization, as we understand it. Power concentrated at the top. Religion organized around that power. Violence used to protect it and expand it. The Indus Valley Civilization has almost none of this, or at least very little that we can clearly identify. We have already touched on the absence of obvious palaces and the surprisingly limited evidence for weapons. But let's go deeper, because when you lay out all of the anomalies together, the picture that emerges is genuinely unlike anything else in the ancient world. Start with the burials. In ancient Egypt, the wealth and status of the dead is written plainly in how they were buried. Pharaohs go into pyramids surrounded by gold and servants and everything they might need in the afterlife. Nobles go into elaborate painted tombs. Ordinary people go into simple graves with a few modest objects. The hierarchy of the living is perfectly mirrored in the hierarchy of the dead. In Mesopotamia, the royal tombs of Ur, discovered by the archaeologist Leonard Woolley in the 1920s, the same decade that Mohenjo-Daro was being excavated, contained spectacular hoards of gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian jewelry, along with the bodies of dozens of servants and soldiers who appear to have been ritually killed to accompany their masters. The Indus burials are different. The graves found at Indus sites are relatively modest. People are buried with some pottery, some personal ornaments, beads, bangles, a few tools. Nothing spectacular. Nothing that announces the burial of a king or a god king or a supremely powerful individual. And the gap between the richest Indus graves and the most modest ones is far smaller than you would expect in a civilization of this size and complexity. What does this mean? It could mean that the Indus Valley Civilization was genuinely more equal than its contemporaries. That wealth and power, whatever form they took, were not concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite in the way they were in Egypt or Mesopotamia. It could mean that the elite expressed their status in ways that have not survived, in perishable goods, in ceremonies, in social distinctions that left no physical trace. Or it could mean something else entirely, something we have not yet thought of, because our frameworks for understanding ancient societies are built on the civilizations we already know, and the Indus people may simply not fit those frameworks. Now consider the temples. Egypt built the temples of Karnak and Luxor. Mesopotamia built the great ziggurats of Ur and Babylon. massive stepped pyramids rising from the flat plains of the Tigris and Euphrates, visible for miles, dedicated to gods whose names and stories we know in considerable detail. In the Indus Valley, no structure has been universally accepted as a major temple complex comparable to those of Egypt or Mesopotamia. There are large buildings on the citadel at Mohenjo-Daro, the Great Bath, the possible granary, the possible assembly halls. Some of them may have had ritual functions, but none of them looks like a temple in the sense that ancient temples everywhere else look like temples. None has an altar, a cult statue, a dedicated space for worship that is clearly identifiable as such. This does not mean the Indus people had no religion. Almost certainly they did. The seals show repeated images of figures that may be deities, a horned figure, seated in what looks like a yoga posture, surrounded by animals, that some scholars have connected to later Hindu traditions. There are terracotta figurines found in homes across the civilization that may represent a mother goddess or a fertility figure. There are ritual deposits, carefully placed objects found in specific locations that suggest deliberate, meaningful acts. But the organized, institutionalized, monumentalized religion that defined ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the religion that required vast temples, professional priesthoods, public sacrifices, and state funding, appears to be absent, or at least invisible. And then there are the weapons. Compared to Egypt or Mesopotamia, clear evidence for warfare and weaponry is surprisingly limited across excavated Indus sites. Arrowheads exist, but the kind used for hunting. A few spearheads, some copper blades whose function is unclear. What is absent is striking. No swords, no battle axes, no armor, no depictions of warfare in the art, no images of conquest or prisoners taken, no records of armies or campaigns. Compare this to Mesopotamia, where the standard of Ur, a decorated wooden box found in the royal tombs, dating to roughly the same period as the mature Indus civilization, depicts soldiers in helmets, war chariots, and rows of defeated enemies being paraded before a king. Or to Egypt, where temple walls are covered with images of pharaohs smiting enemies, leading armies, crushing rebellions. The Indus people left almost none of this behind. Now, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is entirely possible that the Indus civilization had more conflict than the archaeological record currently suggests. Their weapons may have been made of materials that have not survived. Their records of warfare may have been written on perishable surfaces long since lost to time. All of this is possible. But archaeologists are also trained to notice what is not there. And what is not there, at site after site, decade after decade of excavation, is beginning to look less like a gap in the evidence and more like a genuine characteristic of the civilization itself. Which raises a question that is simple to ask and almost impossible to answer. How? How do you build and maintain a civilization of this scale, coordinating millions of people across vast distances, managing resources, conducting trade, building and rebuilding cities over centuries, without the obvious coercive power of a military state? Without obvious evidence for kingship? Without the threat of violence as the ultimate enforcer of order? Some scholars have proposed that the Indus civilization was governed not by kings, but by councils, groups of merchants or civic leaders who made decisions collectively. Others have suggested that the standardization of bricks and weights and pottery styles was maintained not by central authority, but by deeply embedded cultural norms, the same way that a society can maintain consistent behavior across generations without a law requiring it. Others have proposed that there was a centralized authority, perhaps a priestly class, perhaps a merchant oligarchy, that exercised power in ways that simply did not express themselves in the physical markers we associate with power in other ancient cultures. None of these explanations is fully satisfying. None of them has enough evidence behind it to achieve consensus. They are all, to varying degrees, attempts to make sense of a civilization that keeps refusing to behave the way civilizations are supposed to behave. And perhaps that is the most honest thing to say about the anomalies of the Indus Valley Civilization. They are not anomalies in the sense of errors or mistakes or things that need to be explained away. They are simply the features of a civilization that was genuinely, profoundly different from everything else that existed at the same time. A civilization that, as far as we can tell, fed its people well, built its cities carefully, traded across enormous distances, maintained remarkable consistency in its standards and its culture for centuries, and did all of it with far fewer overt monuments to rulers or conquest than Egypt or Mesopotamia. Just cities and people and the quiet, persistent hum of a civilization that worked. Nothing lasts forever. Every civilization that has ever existed has ended, some violently, consumed by conquest or internal collapse in a matter of years, some slowly, fading over centuries into something so different from what they were that the transition is impossible to mark with a single date. The Indus Valley Civilization ended slowly. And in the ending, as in everything else about these people, there is mystery. By around 4,000 years ago, roughly 1,900 years before the Common Era, something had begun to change. The great cities were still standing, people were still living in them. But the signs of organized civic life were beginning to disappear. The standardized bricks were still being used, but less consistently. The careful drainage systems were falling into disrepair, channels blocked, not cleared. The uniformity of pottery styles, maintained so precisely across the civilization for centuries, was beginning to break down. Local variations were appearing. The shared visual language that had held the civilization together across 1 million square kilometers was starting to fragment. Mohenjo-Daro, in its final centuries, shows clear signs of urban decline. Buildings that had once been carefully maintained were being subdivided. Large, well-built rooms, partitioned into smaller spaces, suggesting overcrowding or a breakdown in the civic organization that had once kept the city ordered. New construction was cruder than what had come before. The quality of the brickwork deteriorated. Rubbish accumulated in streets that had once been kept clean. The population was shrinking. People were leaving, not all at once, not in a single dramatic exodus, but gradually. Families and communities drifting away from the cities, moving eastward toward the Ganges Plain, toward the foothills of the Himalayas, dispersing into smaller settlements across a wider landscape. By around 3,700 years ago, Mohenjo-Daro appears to have been largely abandoned. By 3,500 years ago, the great urban phase of the Indus civilization was effectively over. What happened? This is the question that has occupied archaeologists and historians for 100 years. And the answer, like almost everything about the Indus Valley people, is more complicated and more interesting than the simple, dramatic narrative that the question seems to invite. For a long time, the dominant theory was invasion. When the first archaeologists excavated Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s, they found something troubling in the upper layers of the city, the layers corresponding to its final period of occupation, a collection of skeletons, not buried in graves, not laid out with care, but scattered across streets and in rooms and at the bottom of a well. 37 individuals in total, left where they fell, unburied. To the archaeologists of that era, the interpretation seemed obvious. These were the victims of a massacre, a city attacked and overwhelmed, an invasion that brought the civilization to its sudden, violent end. And conveniently, or so it seemed, there was a historical candidate for the invaders. Around this same period, groups speaking Indo-European languages were migrating into South Asia from the Central Asian steppes. These were the people whose descendants would eventually compose the Vedas, the earliest texts of what becomes Hinduism. The Rig Veda, the oldest of these texts, contains references to the destruction of cities, to the god Indra as a breaker of forts, to conflict between the incoming groups and peoples already living in the subcontinent. For decades, the narrative held, the Aryans invaded, the Indus cities fell, a civilization ended. The problem is that the evidence does not support it. Later, more careful analysis of the Mohenjo-Daro skeletons found no evidence of battle wounds, no sword cuts on bones, no arrowheads embedded in bodies, no trauma consistent with violent attack. The skeletons were scattered, yes, but they appear to have died of disease, or been victims of flooding, or simply been individuals who died in the city during its decline and were not properly buried because the civic structures that would normally have managed burial had already broken down. More importantly, the timeline does not fit. The urban decline of Mohenjo-Daro and the other major Indus cities began around 4,000 years ago. The main Indo-European migrations into South Asia appear to have arrived somewhat later, and in any case, the archaeological evidence for a dramatic military invasion simply does not exist. No battle sites, no burned cities, no mass graves of the kind that conquest and massacre reliably leave behind. The invasion theory, which dominated thinking for decades, has now been largely abandoned by mainstream archaeology. The end of the Indus civilization was not a sudden violent overthrow. It was something slower, more diffuse, and in some ways, more haunting. So, what was it? The current consensus points to a combination of factors, and at the center of that combination, playing a role that seems to have been significant, is climate. The Indus Valley Civilization was built on water. Not just the Indus River itself, but an entire network of rivers and seasonal monsoons that made the region extraordinarily productive. The great cities sat on riverbanks. Their agriculture depended on seasonal flooding to deposit rich silt on the fields. Their trade routes followed the rivers to the sea. Everything about the civilization, its food supply, its population density, its urban scale, rested on the assumption that the water would keep coming. Around 4,200 years ago, a century or two before the decline of the Indus cities began, a major climate event reshaped the ancient world. Paleoclimatologists call it the 4.2 kilo-year event, a prolonged period of severe drought lasting somewhere between 1 and 2 centuries that affected a vast swath of the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, it contributed to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. In Egypt, it played a role in the fragmentation of the Old Kingdom, the civilization of the pyramid builders. And in the Indus Valley, it appears to have begun the slow unraveling of everything. The monsoons weakened, the rivers shrank, the seasonal floods that had replenished the soil became less reliable. Agricultural yields dropped. The food surpluses that had sustained large urban populations, the surpluses stored in the great granaries, redistributed through civic systems, supporting tens of thousands of people who were not themselves farmers, began to diminish. At the same time, geological evidence suggests that the rivers themselves were changing course. The Indus River and its tributaries are not stable. They shift over centuries, cutting new channels, abandoning old ones, responding to tectonic movements in the earth beneath them. Some researchers believe that tectonic activity during this period contributed to repeated flooding at Mohenjo-Daro, flood after flood, each one depositing a new layer of silt over the city, each one requiring the inhabitants to rebuild higher and higher until rebuilding was no longer possible. And then there is the Ghaggar Hakra. This is perhaps the most dramatic element of the collapse story, and also one of the most debated. The Ghaggar Hakra was once a substantial river system running through the eastern part of the Indus civilization's territory. Some researchers identify it with the Saraswati, a great river described in the Rig Veda as flowing from the mountains to the sea. Along its banks sat a remarkable concentration of Indus settlements. Some researchers believe the Ghaggar Hakra was once fed more strongly by Himalayan rivers than it is today, though the timing and scale of those changes remain debated. What seems clear is that environmental change across the region disrupted water availability in ways that affected many settlements, and that the populations living along the Ghaggar Hakra system eventually found themselves in a landscape far drier than the one their cities had been built to serve. The settlements did not immediately disappear. People adapted, they moved, they shifted to different water sources, different agricultural strategies, smaller communities more suited to drier conditions. But the urban civilization, the civilization of great planned cities with drainage systems and standardized weights and long-distance trade, could not survive the loss of the water that had made it possible. And so the people dispersed. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the end of the Indus Valley Civilization. It did not end in fire and blood. It ended in movement. The population did not disappear. They walked away. Eastward, mostly, toward the Ganges Plain, toward regions where the monsoons were still reliable, where new agricultural land could be opened up, where smaller communities could sustain themselves without the infrastructure of a great city. The DNA evidence supports this. Modern South Asians carry Indus ancestry. The people did not vanish. They became part of the populations that came after them, mixing with the later arrivals from the steppes, contributing their genes and very likely their knowledge and their traditions to the cultures that would eventually produce classical Indian civilization. In the centuries after the urban collapse, a new phase of Indus culture emerged, smaller, simpler, more rural. Archaeologists call these the late Harappan or post-urban cultures. They kept some elements of the earlier tradition, certain pottery styles, certain craft techniques, but the great cities were gone. The script disappeared. The standardized weights were no longer made. The drainage systems fell apart and were not rebuilt. Something had been lost that could not be recovered. Stand again in that mound of silence in the desert of Pakistan. The wind moves through the ruined doorways. The heat is absolute. The streets that were once wide and straight and full of people are empty now, buried under meters of accumulated earth, waiting for the next archaeologist with a careful brush and a patient hand. 4,000 years ago, tens of thousands of people woke up in this city. They walked to the well. They carried water home. They worked at their trades, making beads, firing pottery, pressing seals into clay, loading boats at the river dock. They ate their meals in rooms with multiple floors and private drainage. They lived their lives in a city that worked, in a civilization that had been working, quietly and extraordinarily well, for longer than Rome would last. And then the rains stopped coming. The rivers changed their course. The harvests grew thin. And slowly, over generations, they left. Not conquered, not destroyed, not erased by a single catastrophic event, just gone. Dispersed into the landscape, absorbed into the populations that came after, leaving behind their bricks and their drains and their beautiful small seals with their unreadable signs. Leaving behind a silence that took 4,000 years for anyone to notice. You have been traveling for a while now, through desert plains and ancient streets, through excavation trenches and museum cases, through 100 years of archaeology and 1,000 unanswered questions, through the slow, patient work of people trying to hear voices that went silent 4,000 years ago. Let's slow down now. There is a particular feeling that comes with studying a civilization like the Indus Valley. It is different from the feeling you get studying ancient Egypt or ancient Rome or ancient Greece. Those civilizations are present in a way that feels almost familiar. Their stories are woven into the fabric of everything that came after them. Their gods became our metaphors. Their architecture became our ideal. Their writing became our history. The Indus Valley Civilization is not present in that way. It is absent, deeply, genuinely absent. Its language is silent. Its stories are lost. Its gods, if it had gods in the way we understand the word, have no names we can speak. Its people built one of the greatest civilizations the ancient world ever produced, and then dispersed quietly into the landscape, leaving almost no trace of themselves in the historical memory of the cultures that came after them. And yet, they are not entirely gone. Think about what has survived, not the texts. Those are lost, if they ever existed on perishable surfaces. Not the names of kings or priests or merchants, not the stories, not the prayers, not the songs. But the cities survived, buried, yes, covered by meters of accumulated earth and 4,000 years of silence, but structurally intact enough that, when archaeologists cleared the mud away, the drainage systems were still recognizable. The engineering logic still legible, the bricks still perfectly made, still perfectly proportioned, still fitted together with a care that had outlasted every empire that rose and fell in the centuries between their laying and their rediscovery. The dancing girl survived. Standing in her bangles, her hand on her hip, looking forward with that expression that is impossible to name precisely, confidence or amusement, or simply the particular quality of someone who knows they are being observed and does not particularly mind. She survived 4,500 years of burial and was placed, eventually, in the National Museum in New Delhi, where she stands today in a glass case, still looking forward. The seals survived, those small carved stones pressed into clay in a port city or a merchant's warehouse or an administrative office, bearing signs that no living person can read. They survived. They sit in museums across the world, patiently holding their secrets, waiting for the linguist or the algorithm or the accidental discovery of a bilingual inscription that will finally, after a century of trying, let us hear what they are saying. And the people survived in their way. The DNA is clear on this. The descendants of the Indus Valley people are alive today. They are among the more than 1 billion people of the Indian subcontinent who carry, in varying proportions, the genetic inheritance of the civilization that built Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. When a child in Mumbai or Karachi or Chennai looks up at the night sky, something in their ancestry, some long, unbroken thread of biological inheritance, connects them to a person who stood in a brick street in a grid city 4,000 years ago and looked up at the same stars. We are not as separate from the ancient world as we sometimes imagine. There is something else worth sitting with as this journey winds down. The Indus Valley Civilization lasted at its mature, urban peak for approximately 700 years. If you count the full arc from its earliest agricultural roots to the final disappearance of its post-urban remnant cultures, closer to 2,000 years. In those 2,000 years, as far as we can tell, they left behind far fewer overt monuments to rulers or conquest than Egypt or Mesopotamia. No pyramid to the vanity of a king. No temple wall carved with images of enemies slaughtered. No royal tomb filled with servants killed to accompany their master into the afterlife. They built drains. They built drains and wells and wide, straight streets and homes with multiple rooms and private bathing areas. They built a public bath of extraordinary quality, sealed with bitumen, fed with clean water. They built granaries large enough to feed entire cities. They built engineering that understood the tides. They built things that served the people who lived in them, not the glory of the people who ruled them. And they maintained all of it consistently across a territory larger than any other civilization of their age for centuries, without, as far as we can tell, the coercive machinery of a military state. We do not know how. We may never know how. But there is something quietly astonishing in the fact that it was done. That somewhere on the face of this ancient earth, a civilization of millions of people found a way to organize themselves, to feed themselves, to house themselves, to trade with each other across vast distances, to maintain shared standards and a shared culture, in a way that left almost no evidence of violence, almost no evidence of extreme inequality, almost no evidence of the brutal concentration of power that we have come to assume is simply what civilization requires. Perhaps it does not require it. Perhaps the Indus Valley Civilization is evidence, quiet, buried, half-legible evidence, that there are ways of organizing human life at scale that we have not fully understood. ways that do not leave behind palaces and weapons and royal tombs, ways that leave behind drains and wells, and the careful, persistent, unglamorous infrastructure of a society that was trying, above all else, to work. That is a thought worth carrying with you. The mound of silence in the desert of Pakistan is still there. The excavations continue, carefully, slowly, season by season, brushstroke by brushstroke. New sites are still being found. New technology is being applied. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, ancient DNA analysis, computational approaches to the script that were not possible even a decade ago. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization is not finished. It is, in a real sense, just beginning. 100 years of archaeology has given us the outlines, the shape of the cities, the scale of the civilization, the broad contours of its rise and its long, slow dissolution. But the interior of the picture is still mostly blank. The language is still silent. The names are still unknown. The beliefs, the stories, the inner life of a civilization that housed millions of people for 2,000 years, still almost entirely waiting. Somewhere in the earth of Pakistan and India and Afghanistan, there are answers. A bilingual inscription, perhaps, pressed into clay by a merchant who needed to communicate across 2 languages. A cache of texts on a surface durable enough to survive. A site not yet found, not yet excavated, containing something that shifts everything we think we know. We do not know when that discovery will come. We do not know if it will come in our lifetimes, or in our children's lifetimes, or in the lifetimes of people not yet born. But it may come. Because the Indus Valley people were here. They were real. They built real things and thought real thoughts and spoke real words to each other in a language that is waiting somewhere in the earth or in the mathematics of its script to be heard again. And when that day comes, when someone finally reads the first Indus word, when the silence breaks, even just a little, it will be one of the great moments in the history of human knowledge. A civilization that the world forgot for 4,000 years, finally speaking. For now, though, let the silence be enough. Let the wind move through the ruined doorways. Let the dust settle on the wide, straight streets. Let the seals rest in their museum cases, holding their secrets a little longer. You have walked through one of the oldest and most mysterious civilizations that ever existed on this earth. You have seen what they built and marveled at how they built it. You have sat with the questions they left behind, questions that 4,000 years have not answered, and that may take another century of patient, careful work to begin to resolve. And you have carried, perhaps, a small piece of them forward, their story, or the shape of it at least, the outline of something vast and quiet and extraordinary, rising from the flat, sun-baked plain of deep history like a mound of silence that turns out, when you look closely enough, to be full of life. Thank you for drifting with us tonight. New journeys every week.